Hey all y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carrie. This is where I talk about knitting, my tips, my tricks, my opinions, and my preferences. And something is in the air for the month of June because I'm back to talk about joins. Now, age-old advice in knitting is to avoid joining yarn in the middle of a row. That it's always better, if you can, to join yarn at the edge, but it's also not realistic to always join yarn at the edge. There's all sorts of situations where you need to be able to successfully join your ball of yarn into the middle of a row. Sometimes you've lost at yarn chicken and you don't want to tink all the way back. Sometimes you've gotten that pesky knot in the middle of a ball and you don't want to tink back. And sometimes you just need to save your yarn and use as much of it as you can because you have a limited amount to work with. So if you want to find out about how to join the ball of yarn into your work without getting any holes, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let's knit. As we get started, there's one thing I want to discuss real quickly. Everything I'm going to demonstrate today is going to be about joining new balls of yarn in the middle of a row when you're working flat, but a lot of it also is going to apply to joining yarn when you're working in the round. When you work in the round, you are knitting one continuous tube of knitting, right? And so there's no edge. And when you join balls of yarn or rejoin yarn into knitting in the round, you are in fact joining yarn in the middle of the work. So the tips I'm going to share with you today about successfully joining yarn in the middle of a row, I think also will apply to when you are working in the round. So yay, double feature on that. As always, if you want to skip around to any part of the video, I do have timestamps below, so let's get started. There are valid reasons why you want to avoid joining new balls of yarn or rejoining your yarn in the middle of a row. Here is actually the back of some stockinette, and if I were to follow a row of knitting, right here, this is a running thread, and this running thread goes up through this purl bump of the row below, and then up through this running thread of a row above. Here's the purl bump, and it comes back down into a running thread of the row above, and then back down through the purl bump of the row below. So this is all one continuous undulation of yarn. When you rejoin yarn in the middle of a row, you're basically disrupting that undulation of yarn. And because that yarn is not a continuous strand, it creates a hole. So the key to joining yarn successfully in the middle of a row really has to do with avoiding that hole, closing up that hole in some form or fashion. There are lots of ways that you can join yarn into your work. In fact, I did a whole video on the 5 that I see mentioned most commonly on the internet. And if you're interested in that video, I'll have a link up here for it. I demonstrate how those techniques work and I give the pros and cons. So after this, it might be worth checking that out. Some of the techniques like magic knot, Russian join, and felted or spit splice. Said it successfully. Some of those techniques have one big advantage when you're joining balls of work in the middle of the row, and that is they simulate a continuous strand of yarn, and so you avoid the hole that might otherwise develop because the yarn is never quite disrupted. However, there are disadvantages to those techniques as well. One of the big disadvantages to Russian join and spit splice is it only really works with wool yarns. They work best with 100% wool yarns that are not superwash. And then of course with magic knot, the big problem with using magic knot in the middle of a row is now you have a knot in the middle of your work. And especially for garments, having a knot in the middle of your work on a garment can be an area of irritation because you can still feel that knot. The other thing with knots, especially in the middle of your work, knots have a tendency to work their way to the front of the work, or just being able to see that. Like that little bump just can show up. So I personally think that magic knot is best used when it's on the edge rather than in the middle of a garment. Fact is, my favorite way to join in new yarn that always works, that always gets me the results that I want, always, is to simply drop the old ball of yarn and start the new ball of yarn, and then weave in my tails later when I'm doing finishing work. Now this method will create a hole in the middle of the work, but with how you weave in your ends, you avoid that hole. You'll be able to close it up. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. I have a little bit of knitting here. And if you look, I'm about to lose at yarn chicken. So I'm going to join a new ball of yarn into the middle of this row. Now I'm doing this on the knit side, but I could just as easily do what I'm about to perform on the purl side as well. And here I've got another little bit of yarn that I'm going to use in a contrasting color so that you can see how this works. And what I like to do when I'm joining new work in is hold the tail of the old ball and the new ball together in the hand that I'm not tensioning my yarn with. So since I tend to knit English, that's going to be my left hand. But if you knit continental, that'll be in your right hand. And then I just start knitting with a new ball. And I'm going to just knit this across. And I'm at the end of the row. And right here, you can already see, look, there's that hole. But I'm not going to worry about it right now. We will fix that when finishing the work. So I'm going to turn the work around and I'll start working on my next row of knitting. And I'm going to just purl my stitches across. What's going to happen is as I get closer to that spot where I joined the yarn, this stitch can just very easily get loose because, again, there's no running thread connecting them. Honestly, I usually just pull the tail to tighten it back up and then work into it, and then I just pull the tail. See, like this is that stitch and it's all loose. I just pull the tail again. And the same thing will happen here as well. This gets very loose and I just pull the tail to tighten it up and continue along the row. Thusly. All right, so here we go. I got this row finished. Now I'm going to turn my needles and here's that hole. And again, this stitch and this stitch are getting a little loose. I'll just pull those tails again to keep it tidy. When I go back to weave in my tails, I will fix the tension of those two stitches and it will be fine. It's just that until I weave my ends, those stitches will tend to get loose. If that really drives you crazy while you're knitting, and sometimes it drives me crazy, what you can always do is just take these two tails and just do a little half hitch knot or overhand knot like that. That will stabilize this until you're ready to weave in your ends. So I'm going to go ahead and knit a couple more rows and then we will come back to look at how to close up this hole with weaving in your ends. I finished this swatch sample and I did a bind off, so now I'm ready to weave in my tails. I'm going to undo that knot that I had. We do not want knots in our work. And I'm actually going to look at this side. What I want to do first is, this was the last stitch of the old yarn, and here's the first stitch of the new yarn. I want to make sure those stitches are evened out. And I'm just going to tug on the tail a little bit to get those stitches evened up. So that looks pretty good. It's not going to be perfect yet because weaving in the tails is what's going to really fix the tension on this. But this is a good start. So now we're going to weave in the tails. There are various methods that you can use to weave in your tails, but regardless of what method you choose, how this starts is the same way no matter what, which is we're going to take the tail of the new yarn and bring it over to the left. And we're going to bring the tail of the old yarn and bring it over to the right so that these strands cross. And if you think about it, if I had continued knitting with the old ball of yarn, this would have been all the way over to this edge. And if I had started the row with the new ball of yarn, it would have been over here to my left. So that's what you're doing. You're bringing these tails into the direction that they would have gone into had there been no change here in the middle. Now, the first time I saw how to close up this hole in the middle of a row when you join in the middle was by Lucy Neatby, and she did the cross. What she did was she actually wove her tails down diagonally through the purl bumps. I like to weave in my tails using duplicate stitch. Duplicate stitch retraces the path of the stitch with the tail, and I think it really helps in keeping the tension of your work and these stitches all nice and even and consistent. If you want a video that goes over all of this, I do have a link up here, so check that out after this if you want. All right, so I'm ready to weave in my tail. I'm going to start with the tail of my new ball of yarn. Getting this weave started can seem tricky because in duplicate stitch you are retracing the path of your stitches, and hello, there's no running stitch here to follow, but it's really not a big deal. Here's the tail of my yarn, and I just need to identify the purl bump that it's coming out of, which is right here. So I'm going to just go right into that purl bump as well, like this. Oops, lost my needle there. That's fine. Let me rethread this. Now I'm going to retrace the path of the old yarn. So here's the leg, and it's coming up through this running thread from the row above. So I'm going to just bring my needle up through there, follow along the purl bump into this running thread. This is the left running thread of the stitch above, go back down there, and then I come back into this purl bump that I first entered into. Now what I want to do is I want to turn this over and I want to look at those stitches and I want to see what the tension looks like. Here's the first stitch of the new ball of yarn, and that looks, to my eye, like it's the same size as the stitches next to it. So that's good. I've reestablished that tension, and I'm going to continue weaving in my ends using duplicate stitch. And I'll just continue this for a couple inches. And boom, that is woven in. That weave will stay in place, no problems there. And you can see here again, that is the stitch, the first stitch of this new ball of yarn. And the tension looks good. It's not loose, it's not sloppy. Now I can weave this tail, going the other way. So here, this right here, this is the running thread of the new ball of yarn that I joined in. It's coming into this purl bump, so I'm going to follow that up into that purl bump. Here is the left running thread of the row above. Notice that it's the new yarn color. And then I'm going to follow that along this purl bump and into this running thread. Make sure I got that. Oh, here it is. Into this running thread, down into the purl bump, and down. Now I'm going to check the tension of that stitch that I just did, and that looks good to me. And now I'm going to just continue duplicate stitch, and I'm going to continue following that thread path of the new ball of yarn. Now, again, I'm going to stretch this. Look, you stretch that and everything stays nice and tidy. But let's look at it from the front now. And here, so you can see here where I did the ball change, but that's because I used contrasting colors so you could clearly see what was going on. But if this new ball of yarn was yellow as well, you would not know where I had done that ball change. And watch, I'm going to stretch this fabric. Notice you can't see the weave because the duplicate stitch, it's tracking that same thread path, so the weave just moves with the work. And there's no hole, and that is completely stable, and that will last a lifetime. It really will. This will last a lifetime. What do you think? Was this video helpful for you today? How do you like to weave in your tails? Do you avoid at all cost, joining yarn in the middle of your work? Or are you like me and you're like, I really hate wasting yarn at the edge of the work and having this huge giant strand, and so yeah, I'll do it. I'll lose it yarn chicken and I will just go ahead and join new yarn in the middle of my work. What is your preference? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's video and you got good information out of it. If so, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends, your knitting groups. I'm very excited because I'm only 4 subscribers away from hitting 100. When I get to 100 subscribers, I get a personalized YouTube address so I can be youtube.com/CarrieCraftGeek. So really trying to get to that 100 subscriber goal. I never thought I'd be a person who would have subscriber goals, but here I am. Anyway, if you'd like to help me with that goal, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and that will let you know whenever I upload a new video. If you'd like to find me on social media, all of that is in the description box below. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you may be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy knitting. Bye! This might be my most efficient shooting I've done in a while. I'm very excited about that. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening. Excuse me. Okay, try that again. So there's any number of ways that you can join new balls of yarn into your work. I feel like I'm just saying new joins, join new balls of yarn. I feel like I'm saying this 100 times. I'm trying to think, is there a different way I can vary it, but I can't think of anything. Anyway. Budget. 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 I'm hungry. Anyway, what do you think of my makeup look today? I love this look. My sister and I on Sundays, we do what we call Sister Sundays. My sister, she lives in Maine, but on Sundays, we get online together to watch a really bad film on Netflix to make fun of it. And we do this thing where we do like themed makeup. So we've been covering different eras of makeup, and on Sunday we did 1950s, and I loved it so much that I went ahead and pretty much recreated the makeup, not the hair, but I recreated the makeup for today because I was like, wow, I really like this.